Hello, this is Rich Clarke. So, yeah, that's right, bud. So, figured I'd try and do a video here while we're in the park. Our favorite thing to do is walk around and talk about some things. So, if you don't know who I am, I'm a stay-at-home dad, Bitcoin enthusiast, and former libertarian political activist. That's small L, libertarian. And I worked mostly within the Republican Party to try and mostly get Ron Paul elected to president, both in 2008 and in 2012. And to that end, I became a delegate to the National Convention, one of 3 from the state of Georgia. It was Catherine Bernard, Oleg Avutin, and myself who voted for Ron Paul. And after the National Convention, I kind of backed off of politics a little bit. My wife got pregnant with him, I guess shortly before the convention. And then he was born in February, a couple months early. He's in the hospital for 6 weeks. And it was basically a lot of time taken up. And then ever since then, I've been hanging out with him as much as possible. And, sorry, I'm looking at the ground here because, can't trip. So, I stepped back from politics for several reasons. One was just time. That's pretty much what I told everybody. I had this new kid, and he was my priority, which is true. But there are some other things going on that I want to talk about. And I may have to do this in several parts, because I actually tried this last week, doing this very same thing, and the video was like an hour long. And I was like, nobody's going to watch that. So, I'll try and get as much out there as I can in the shortest amount of time. So, just very briefly, 2 minutes, about myself and the involvement in Ron Paul's campaign. So, I became involved in Ron Paul's campaign in 2008. I had some friends of mine who I worked with and were friends with, who were libertarians, capital L, who had been following libertarian politics for a long time. And they decided to check out Ron Paul, but they started talking about him. So I watched a debate with him in it, and kind of the rest is history. Ron Paul he literally changed my life. Bringing like a consistent political philosophy, which then extends to consistent other areas of philosophy into my life, was a dramatic shift for me from what I had learned about politics to date. Political theory and everything else was, of course, just a mashed potato glob of who knows what. Whatever sounds good is good. Like, I really didn't understand even what the difference between conservative and Democrat is, which now that I know even more about these things, I suppose I'm right back where I started on that one. Except I see that there actually is just no difference. So, it was the philosophical views of Ron Paul that brought me to him, and the things he pointed out about the government, the things I learned, and then that led me to, a rabbit hole of place to place, one thing leading to another. Read somebody's book, they recommend another book, you read that book, they recommend some more books, you find a website, you find a podcast, and so on and so forth. And I think in the 2008 campaign, I read on Daily Paul that this dude took out a $60,000 full-page ad in the New York Times for Ron Paul. I was like, whoa, that's awesome. And that guy's name was Peter Schiff, who I know a lot of people have heard of. Peter started a radio show. Well, first of all, he ran for Senate in 2010, and I donated to his campaign. I also volunteered and made phone calls for him from here in Georgia. And, of course, he lost in the primary. But then, about not too long after, he started a radio show that I started listening to. And he started having I just kind of started liking his guest hosts more than him. So Tom Woods and Stefan Molyneux would guest host his show. And it was, I think, around the time of the National Convention, right thereafter, I started looking into Stefan Molyneux and watching just some of his stuff he does on his own. There are a lot of other factors that play into it, but I'll just talk about Steph, big hat tip Steph, because he's the one that kind of congealed a lot of things that I've been thinking for a long time into an even more consistent philosophy than that of Ron Paul. Because there are a lot of paradoxes that emerge, even in libertarian politics. And I'll go into the one that flipped me over to the other side. And again, trying to keep it brief. I'm going to say the other side. We'll get there in a minute. It's the same side. It's just further. So, the ultimate red pill. I'd taken many red pills, right, along the way. About a great many subjects that I realized that, what was out there and generally considered to be true was not really even remotely close to true. And as I looked into libertarian politics, in between the two campaigns, I became involved with an organization called Freedom Force International. I was the founder and president of the Atlanta chapter. It's a group that was founded by G. Edward Griffin, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. And he and I actually became friends and corresponded quite a bit. And he even came to Atlanta for an event once and so on. So the kind of core document for the Freedom Force is called The Creed of Freedom. And it's a one-page work, which is largely pretty awesome. G. Edward Griffin penned it and put it out there, and basically it's the creed of freedom. It's the creed. If you're in the Freedom Force International, it's what you believe a just state should be. And one of the main pillars of that was that since we the people, right, ordained the state, of the people, by the people, for the people, the state is nothing but a delegation of privileges. So just as if you own a house, you can delegate the privilege for somebody else to live there if they pay you rent or make other terms, whatever you guys agree upon. They don't have the privilege to then sell the property to somebody else. They also can't, tear it down and build a skyscraper in your yard. So another core facet of philosophy and the philosophy of Freedom Force is that there's no such thing as a group. And that's true. There's no such thing as a group. There's only individuals. Yes, you can have many individuals together, but the group is just a concept that's made up in the mind of humans. Just like there's no such thing as the number 3. Really. You can have 3 apples, but the concept 3 is a human concept. Those concepts are obviously important, but the fact of the matter is there really is no such thing as a group. So if you're talking about rights and individual rights, all rights are individual rights. Groups do not have rights. So the individuals that make up the government grant the government privileges based on the rights that those people have. So you have the right to defend yourself. Obviously, you can delegate that right to defend yourself to a third party, a defense company, or in the case of our society, the state, to defend yourselves, defend your property against aggressors. All the while, of course, supposedly not giving up your right to do the same on your own. So, in the Creed of Freedom, one thing it says that if the state presumes to have any power beyond of that which an individual has, then the state is invalid as it is a power unto itself. Okay, well, that sounds great, and it's true, but the problem is that the very existence of the state ordains that you must, by definition, grant it powers that individuals don't have. So, for instance, taxation, which is the one that kind of led me over. We were having a debate in another organization about the proper level of taxation and where it should be. And then specifically in regard to that passage of the Creed of Freedom, it basically came to a conclusion that it's a paradox. Because I cannot go to my neighbor's house, knock on his door, tell him that I've drawn up a social contract that he didn't have to sign. But in that contract, he owes me a half of his income, or even 10% or 5%, whatever, of his income. And if he doesn't pay up, I can kidnap him, put him in my basement, and hold him there till he does pay up. I obviously don't have the ability to do that. So the state, by proxy, should not have the ability to do that either. Now, if the state can't levy taxes, since the state doesn't provide really any goods or services in a free market fashion, the state has a power unto itself that an individual doesn't have. So it's a paradox. Now, Max Weber's definition of the state, which is a pretty good one, it's the definition for the state if you look at Wikipedia and a lot of other sites, and that is that the state is a monopoly on the legitimate use of force in a given geographical area. So that is a monopoly, which is the sole grantee or user of a legitimate basically means, if you look it up, it means conforming with law. But more practically, it means, obviously if a policeman comes into a Starbucks and forcibly detains somebody and drags them out by their feet, handcuffed while they're screaming and kicking, nobody's going to do anything about it. Nobody's going to say anything. Everybody's just going to look back down at their coffee and their morning paper and their iPhones and go along with their day. If some random dudes did that, people would be going crazy. They'd clear the area out. They'd hide under their tables. They'd call whatever authorities. They might, if they're carrying a weapon, they might use that weapon to defend the person that's being drug out forcibly. But since the state has legitimacy, it can get away with a lot. So the legitimate use of force or coercion in a given geographical area, that is what the state is. Now, coercion is an interesting term. If you look it up, there's a lot of definitions, but the best is coercion is the initiation of force or the threat of force. Now, a lot of people will say taxation isn't theft, but I disagree completely, because taxation is obviously not voluntary, even though the IRS says it is. Everybody knows if you don't pay taxes, either income taxes, property taxes, whatever, you will first get letters in the mail, then you'll get court summons. If you don't show up to those court dates, you'll then eventually guys will show up at your door to force you to comply and go to those court dates. If you choose to resist them, if you own a weapon or a stick or anything, if you try to keep these men from taking you away against your will, kidnapping you, and they'll kill you. So you may only get a letter in the mail, but don't be fooled. We all know that letter in the mail is actually a death threat. Isn't that right, buddy? All threats levied by the state are death threats when it comes down to it. Threat of death or incarceration. So, as libertarians, small L, or maybe you're a big L libertarian, and what I mean by that is, libertarianism is a philosophy. Capital L libertarianism is a party. Political party. So as a libertarian, small L, we abhor monopolies. And of course, a lot of people who are statists believe that if the free market was allowed to reign free, that we'd have monopolies running rampant And the Austrian economists have debunked that to such extreme measures that it's really just a nonsense argument. Monopolies are a product of the state, which makes sense because the state is a monopoly itself. Next, the greatest principle of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. That everything in society should be voluntary. That you should not use force to get what you want. So in other words, a society where win-win transactions are the norm, and where win-lose transactions, otherwise known as violence, are scarce. So to grant an entity a monopoly on the legitimate use of the initiation of force is a 1-2 punch into the libertarian graveyard. And we've taken free market economics to a point where we all know that freely interacting people, acting voluntarily in their own best interest, will create the most prosperous society the world's ever seen. But for some reason, we've got, the central planning state and the notion of central planning, we've got hanging off the cliff, and we just don't want to pry its fingers off the cliff and let it just go into the annals of history as an immoral way to organize society. Which is what I'm getting around to, that essentially what I'm saying is that to grant the monopoly on a use of force to any entity, which is basically just a grouping of individuals, is immoral and not in line with anything remotely resembling libertarian philosophy. So, if you follow the principles to their logical ends, there can be no state. That's right. No state whatsoever. Granting individuals the ability to curtail your rights, to protect your rights, is a paradox. And it is a logical fallacy. So, that's why I haven't really been involved in politics. And to all my friends who still are, I know we suffered a big loss last month. Charles Gregory, this is here in Georgia. Charles Gregory lost his House seat in a primary. So did Sam Moore. Both, of course, Charles was the 2012 state coordinator. Sam was the 2012 District 11 coordinator. We also had Catherine, who was a fellow delegate to the Republican National Convention. She lost a primary. She wasn't an incumbent though. So we lost 2 House seats, and several of our people who were attempting to gain seats were unsuccessful. And I know that it hit our incumbents hard, that they fought a long and pretty dirty race. They were outspent, not quite 10-1, but I mean, they were outspent like crazy. I think the figures were there's one political action committee that spent $250,000 just on Sam and Charles. So, I'm actually happy for both of them. I think it's going to improve their family lives, as this stuff really takes a toll on you. I'm sure they can both attest to the psychological toll, being slandered constantly, being set up, being attacked relentlessly, unethical, dirty tricks used to mislead the public about you. The list goes on. To them, I'd say, welcome to the real revolution. I invite you to join the real revolution, which is happening outside the political sphere, happening in an area where you can actually have some control in the outcome happening in a way that is peaceful and that doesn't involve you and your name and your family being dragged through the mud. And I think I'll talk about that in my next video. So this is my coming out video where I tell the world, hey, that's right, I'm an anarchist now. And you know, there's a joke in the anarchist community. Do you know what the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist is? And the punchline, do you know what it is, bud? You know what it is? 6 months. So, thank you if you got to this point for watching, and of course I'll talk about the real revolution that's going to accomplish in time everything we've dreamed of in our political aspirations without having to climb the mountain, the evil mountain that is politics. So I look forward to Callum and I look forward to talking to you in the future. And alright, that's it for now. Say bye-bye, buddy. Say bye-bye.